Welcome to the NFL Fantasy Football Show, presented by DraftKings. Here's your host, Marcas Grant.
What is up? Welcome to another edition of the NFL Fantasy Football Show presented by DraftKings. It's me, your man, MG Marcas Grant, still masking and socially distancing when and where necessary. And a big Wednesday show for you. As always, we'll have Adam Rank here with his starts and sits for the week. We'll get you some wiretaps, so the guys you picked up off the waiver wire, whether or not you should be starting them this week. And a little bit of a draft do-over now that we are through 7+ weeks of the season. If you had a chance maybe to take some shots up to guys who were playing really well, would you do it? And where would you decide to do it? So we'll talk about that and plenty more. But first, as we always do about this time, we'll talk to our faithful producer, Senior Edward L. Murphy, Esquire. Murph, how you feeling over there today?
I'm all right, but I'm sure you're much better. You're way better. Thanks to your Dodgers finally getting over the hump, man. I mean, I got to say congrats to you and the rest of my Dodger fan friends. I'm happy for you guys. I mean, obviously being in 3 of the last 4 World Series, but just to finally convert now and thank God you beat the Rays, who are in the AL East, who I'm not a fan of. So, but I was rooting for you guys the whole way. I mean, it's a really fun, likable team, and it was just a fun series to watch.
Yeah, I certainly obviously enjoyed it. It was great. It was nice to finally kind of get that monkey off the back after 32 years. I know for you, I think for you it's got to be double because, one, they beat the Rays, who were in your division, and yes. 2, they did it with Mookie Betts, who is, your long-term rival, the Red Sox, basically gave away for a ho-ho and a 10-speed. So, that's got to make you feel a little better, I would think.
It's so good. I mean, it's so good just to see all the Boston fans upset over that and just to not let another AL team besides the Yankees win this one. So, like I said, it's a really likable team, easy to root for. I have no ill will towards the Dodgers at all. I mean, I'm fine rooting for them. And what it proves to me now is after the Dodgers finally got over the hump, now it's the Yankees are inching their way closer. Now they're the next team, so it's totally fine. Got that one out of the way. 2021 Yankees year.
Well, I know that Major League Baseball would love at some point to have a Dodgers-Yankees series in the next few years. That would, I'm sure, do great numbers for him. So, so it's fun, and we turn the page to the rest of the NFL season, and hey, we look forward to spring training because pitchers and catchers probably reporting in just a couple of months as well. So now we turn our attention, of course, as we always do on Wednesday, to Adam Rank, and Rank, I guess I should congratulate you too. I don't think I properly congratulated you on the Lakers winning their championship, which hasn't been that long ago. It just feels like in COVID time, like it's been forever.
Yeah, we've talked about this a lot too with like Laker fans. You take it for granted so much that they win championships to the point that one time we were talking about it, the year that they brought in Karl Malone and Gary Payton, like we were actually happy. Like it wasn't that big a deal that they lost to the pit. You're like, yeah, like I know the Lakers lost, but Karl Malone didn't win. So that felt kind of good. So, but again, congratulations to the Dodgers for their championship. I will push back on Eddie Murphy a little bit. And I got to say this, Justin Turner, I love, Cal State Fullerton guy. Joe Kelly went to Corona High. So my 2 alma maters right there represented. I played baseball at Corona. I did not play at Cal State Fullerton. They're a little, well, Corona's nationally ranked. By the way, we're nationally ranked in high school baseball, but CSUF a little bit too much. I have to say this Dodgers team is completely unlikable outside of those 2 guys. I think that Max Muncy is like, he was a journeyman, right? That all of a sudden, like, okay, all of a sudden you're a good player. Like, okay. And the way you pop off, like I remember him popping off to Madison Bumgarner, who at the time had 3 World Series and 3 World Series rings. And you're popping off to him for a team that was, choking for a while. But again, I don't want to make this about that. I'm stoked for Justin and Joe. And so congratulations to all my friends in Southern California, who all 4 of them who root for the Dodgers.
Get it out of the ocean is still a classic line. I don't care.
But you're like the jobber popping off to the Rock.
I mean, that's usually what makes for a good show, right? I mean, usually the Rock ends up winning, but it makes for a good show right up until that moment. So, all right, let's start with some fantasy headlines because there are some things going on that should impact your fantasy week. The first one being that Christian McCaffrey has been designated to return from injured reserve. He's been dealing with that high ankle sprain for a few weeks now. We're still not sure if he's going to play on Thursday night against the Falcons. He could be a game time decision, but either way, it looks like Mike Davis's time as the lead back there in Carolina is pretty much coming to an end. So if you've got Mike Davis, what do you do with him now?
I think you want one last hurrah. It is, it's like when you're in Vegas and you decide like, hey, let's stay one more day. Like, let's do it. And you hope you can go out with a bang. But over the last couple of weeks, his production has kind of dipped a little bit. He was good. He wasn't bad against the Bears. He did get into the end zone. But last week, rushed for just 12 yards. He did have 5 receptions, which was good, which helped salvage the day. But I think that the euphoria of the first 3 weeks when he was playing amazing and everybody's like, oh my God, do they even need Christian McCaffrey? Well, I think the last 2 games have shown that, like, certainly we do. And I think Mike Davis is going to be a valuable piece just in case they want to spell Christian McCaffrey a little bit, or in case he gets God forbid that happens. But you know what? You want one more chance and one more dance. But unfortunately, I think they're going to go back to a heavy dose of CMC once he's healthy and ready to go.
I think the last couple of weeks is sort of a reminder of why it is Mike Davis, and look, no disrespect, but why he is a backup to Christian McCaffrey, just not having that steady production week after week. It's also sort of why we were advocating for the last few weeks that if you have a chance to trade Mike Davis, you probably want to do it sooner than later, just because when McCaffrey comes back, all those opportunities go away. So now I think you're right. They're playing the Falcons. It's a great matchup. You give it one last shot. And at that point, I don't know, maybe you say goodbye. You wish Mike Davis well, and you send him back to the waiver wire, because otherwise I don't know that there's going to be a lot of opportunity for him. Maybe one carry every couple of series, but it's not going to be much for Mike Davis after this. Other news out of the division: Chris Godwin fractured his finger. He underwent surgery for it. He will miss week 8 for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. There's a chance he could come back in week 9, depending on how the finger is healing. But with Godwin out, does this mean we pivot back to Mike Evans, or is there somebody else maybe we take a look at?
It's Scotty Miller season. Had a good game last week. I'm looking at him. I just actually had to add him in my league of record because I just realized that I was carrying 3 receivers. It's a team that starts only 2 with 1 flex. And I'm like, oh, I only have 3 receivers, and one of them's DeAndre Hopkins, one of them's DJ Chark. So and the other's DJ Moore. So I had to go and pick up Scotty Miller today. I know it's weird though. And Marcus, I'm sure you saw this. Michelle McZook, she's a fantasy analyst that everybody knows. She's one of our researchers now too,
yes,
for the NFL, which is amazing. And we love having her on staff. She was talking about dropping Mike Evans. I think it was her. I don't want to, if it wasn't her, and I'm putting this on her as a talking point, I apologize. But I don't agree with that. I think he'll be good. But I still think that Scotty Miller, another role in the B-roll now, so I feel compelled to talk about him again. I think Scotty Miller is going to be really good.
I do think Scotty Miller's kind of the next man up there. And I have seen some of this talk of dropping Mike Evans. And to that, I say balderdash. I don't use the word balderdash very often. I think that might have been the first time. But the ceiling is too high for Mike Evans on a week-to-week basis to consider putting him out there on the waiver wire. I get being frustrated. I get maybe wanting to trade him, but I don't think I could just let him go and not get anything back in return. I will say that without Chris Godwin, he has been better, so maybe that is a reason to sort of be hopeful. The big wrinkle in this whole thing is what happened in a couple of weeks when Antonio Brown is on the field and, he's going to take some of those targets. That's when it gets really messy. But I'm with you. I think Scotty Miller is kind of a nice add this week, but don't drop Mike Evans. Don't drop Mike Evans.
Let's effort to get Michelle on the show. I think she needs to. I don't want to besmirch her without giving her the opportunity to to defend herself here.
Yeah, we've had Kate and Michelle, both Michelle and Kate, on this show before, so we'll try to effort at least one of them back and see if she can come and defend her takes and speak for herself there. Last headline: Carlos Hyde, who looked like he was in line to kind of step up and be the Seahawks running back with Chris Carson dealing with a foot injury. Well, Hyde himself has a hamstring injury and he's uncertain to play against the 49ers. So if he can't go, is there any other Seattle running backs you would actually take a shot at this week?
Well, what are we thinking? Travis Homer, DJ Dallas? I believe that this is actually just doing us a favor because Carlos Hyde at full health going up against the 49ers was not going to be a great matchup anyways. So unless you're caught in a position where you have no running backs at all. Like, it's almost to that point because I wouldn't want to trust it. I think they're going to have to throw the ball a little bit more. I don't want to go with the running back. I know, this will probably end up being a more high scoring game than it should be. I think traditionally we're used to these guys playing closer games and everything like that. And the 49ers defense has played really well over the last couple of weeks, but I still think with Seattle, they're going to be throwing the ball an awful lot. So I'm probably avoiding this situation unless it's absolutely necessary in a 14-teamer or something like that.
I agree. I think, if it's Carlos Hyde, I might have taken a shot on him because it is a revenge game, I guess, in some way. Anything beyond that, I don't know that I could really trust Homer or Dallas or anybody like that in my lineup beyond, like you said, if it's a really deep league and I really need some help at running back, that's the only way I do it. But other than that, I think, it's a big game, I think, potentially for DK Metcalf. Tyler Lockett is going to get his targets, but I think the running back situation is too much of a mess. And I completely stay away from that one if I could this week. All right. Today's show is sponsored by DraftKings, a leader in one-day fantasy sports. DraftKings has millions of dollars in total prizes up for grabs this week. So download the DraftKings app now. Use code TEAM during sign-up and start feeling the sweat like never before. Eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com for details. Come back, we will do a draft do-over, a handful of guys who maybe are exceeding expectations and where we might consider taking them in drafts if we had a chance to do it all over again. This is the NFL Fantasy Football Show presented by DraftKings. It's time for Fast Connections presented by Verizon, and today we're going to do a draft do-over as we start Week 8, a handful of guys who maybe have outperformed expectations and where we would draft them, or if we would draft them at all, depending on what they have done or who they are. So let's start with a couple of quarterbacks, the first one being Josh Allen, who right now is the QB4, had just a lightning fast start to the season, maybe has slowed down the last few weeks, but like I said, he's still the quarterback 4 overall. A guy who's kind of coming off in the middle rounds. If you were to do a draft right now, where would you take Josh Allen?
Is it appropriate for me to say that he was properly rated by me? Like, I had him as the QB6. Sure. I'm pretty sure it was somewhere right around QB6. I was pretty not bullish on him, but I thought that he was just outside of the elite of the fantasy quarterbacks. And what we really liked was his ability to run the football, which is always there. But having Stephon Diggs was going to make a huge deal, and it was kind of surprising to me that a lot of people were kind of dismissive of him coming into the year. I liked Russell Wilson better. I liked Kyler Murray better. Mahomes, obviously. But I thought that Kyle Allen was right in there. Like, he wasn't he wasn't one of the main guys of the NWO, but he was like good. He's like when Macho Man joined. Like, he wasn't like one of the original guys, but when Macho Man got there, you're like, oh, this is cool. This fits. So I think it was an appropriate ranking for him. What do you say, Marcus?
I actually sort of agree. I maybe this is me sort of taking thumbing my nose at some people because I drafted him in the Scott Fish Bowl, which is essentially a 2-quarterback league. And I made him the, I think, 7th or 8th quarterback off the board. And it was fairly early. I think it was like the 2nd or 3rd round. And people sort of scoffed at me, like, why are you drafting Josh Allen so early? And that's a terrible pick. And, now I can sort of laugh because my Scott Fish Bowl team is actually, hashtag good this year. So I do think, though, I think we sort of had this one right. And I think maybe the hot start, changed some minds and thought, maybe would have rocketed it up some draft boards. Although I think he's sort of come back and leveled off a little bit. Now I'm curious to see how he finishes, but yeah, maybe we did get this one right. So maybe we're okay here. Tom Brady is one that I had him as the QB 11 when I started the season this year in preseason. Right now, he is playing really well, especially the last couple of weeks. Did we get that one right, or would we change at all where we're drafting Tom Brady?
I still feel like we're making a decision each and every week with Tom Brady, where he's not necessarily an automatic start. Now, obviously, Monday Night Football against the New York Giants. I don't know if that counts as a revenge game or not, because he's going up against the Giants, a team that beat him in the Super Bowl twice, going up against a quarterback who sort of looks like Eli Manning. I guess it would be kind of like somebody broke your heart, so you date somebody who looks just like him, like that kind of revenge. Like, I don't know, like there's layers of this that I think we really need to get into at some point. But I'm thinking about this, and so I think again that I had Tom Brady right in the appropriate spot. But I think when I'm looking at both of these quarterbacks that we just talked about, it makes me think about Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow. Now, Joe Burrow, I was definitely like, hey, this is a guy I would take a stab on at the end of the year because I think that he could have to throw the ball an awful lot because of that defense in Cincinnati. I completely whiffed on Justin Herbert, and not just in a like, don't draft him because he's the backup quarterback, but coming out of Oregon, I had him as the number 3 quarterback in the draft behind Jordan Love. And who knows? I don't know. When all is said and done in 10 years, it might be proven to be correct, but currently it looks really stupid to say that. And I blame Daniel Jeremiah. No, that was my own view, but I think it goes to show, and I know this goes for every position, but again, like quarterback is the one that always gets called out the most, of waiting on a quarterback. That if you had not even drafted a quarterback and you decided in week 1 to go with Justin Herbert, and then with Joe Burrow, and then in week 2 just said, oh, Justin Herbert's starting against the Chiefs, I'll get him into my lineup real quick, you actually would be pretty good right now.
Which is absolutely true and very weird. Like, the weird thing about this is that every year, at least the last few years, there seems to be a guy that you could wait till the very end of the draft or maybe get in free agency that ends up having a great year. A couple of years ago, it was Patrick Mahomes. Last year, it was Lamar Jackson. Now it looks like it's Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert. And I keep saying every year, like, it just can't keep happening, right? You can't just keep finding guys at the end of drafts to go out and ball out for you, but it keeps happening. So maybe we can, like, maybe it's just a matter of like finding that guy to hit on. That's sort of the trick, right? Is finding the actual guy. It's one thing to say that there's a guy. It's another thing to actually find that guy. But as for Brady, I still think maybe we keep him in the same draft spot because you're right. He still is kind of a week to week proposition. Like, it's not necessarily a, set it and forget it sort of thing. So maybe we got the quarterbacks right, and maybe it was just a bad idea to put quarterbacks in this segment at all because they're
no. It's a good discussion, Marcus. You know what though? But as we're talking about it, and I was thinking about Antonio Brown, like it might be a thing. Like Brady, there's an opportunity he could get better. So maybe we should move him up the draft board because it depends on who you are drafting ahead of him. Because I would say Aaron Rodgers would probably go ahead of him, but like that middle, that little like that. When you have that group of familiarity where you have like the Matt Ryan and Drew Brees and all those guys, I thought Tom Brady should have been ahead of them. So maybe we should have moved him up a little bit more. So I'll say that he would be. So if we're thinking about, I know this is probably, we shouldn't be thinking out loud like this, but like Mahomes is there and Russell and Kyler, Deshaun Watson, Aaron Rodgers, and then Brady probably should have been up there a little bit more. I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody and you guys can flame me later. But yeah, I think Brady should have been a little bit higher.
That's fair. I mean, I think because he was double digit round, and I think maybe he creeps into like round 9 or something like that with what.
But people would draft Stafford in front of him or something like that, something crazy. So yeah, okay, Brady should be higher. That's good.
All right, we settled that. We've settled it. Okay. Todd Gurley, who I think a lot of people have pretty much written off and said he was washed and people were kind of avoiding him. But like right now, he's the running back 8, mostly because he keeps scoring touchdowns. He's got 7 rushing touchdowns so far this year. He's not really catching the ball like he does, but he's a top 10 running back. And I don't necessarily foresee things changing in a big way. Or are we rethinking where we would have drafted Todd Gurley based on what we've seen?
Based on what we've seen so far, I would have to say absolutely. Because there was a quartet of guys who right at the end and beginning of the second round that people absolutely loved this season. You're talking about Josh Jacobs, Miles Sanders, Kenyon Drake, maybe Clyde Edwards-Helaire goes in there as well. Like Todd Gurley should have been in that mix with those running backs because he's been very consistent. Like even when he's trying not to score a touchdown, he scores a touchdown. And by the way, I know that he's getting a lot of heat for this, and people are like, oh, what an idiot. You're like, bro, he plays for the Falcons. They're not going to the playoffs. Get your touchdown, dog. You did the right thing. Who cares? Like, winning a game for the Falcons should be secondary. My fantasy team has a better chance of making the NFL playoffs than the Falcons. So score your touchdowns. Don't try to do the right thing. Whatever, like MJD, Brian Westbrook, all you guys in the past, it was very delightful. It was very admirable that you did such things. But Todd Gurley, listen, I got your back. I think you did the right thing. You're cool. You're always going to be good in my book.
I mean, look, I don't think any fantasy managers were complaining about Todd Gurley scoring a touchdown. And of course, I think everybody sort of knew that once he did that, the Falcons were doomed to lose. It just
Oh
because
yeah.
that's just the Falcon way. But as for Gurley, I think I don't know if it was this week or last week. I think Kimmy Checks on this show said that the thing that worried her about Todd Gurley is that he seems touchdown dependent, and she's not wrong. The problem, or not the problem, but the thing about that is he keeps scoring touchdowns. So that's cool. Like, you can be touchdown dependent if you keep scoring touchdowns. Like, when they get near the goal line, they give him the ball and he finds his way into the end zone. So I think that alone gives you a fair level of confidence that he's going to continue to be semi-productive. It would be nice if they would throw him the ball, but that doesn't seem to be happening right now. So the fact that he's staying healthy, the fact that he's on the field, the fact that he's getting in the end zone means that I think he definitely gets bumped up a round or two. I think he was going fourth, fifth round. I mean, I could see him maybe going in the third round at this point. I do think a fall off's coming, but not dramatic. So I take a different shot at Todd Gurley than I would have probably in the preseason.
Sure.
All right. Last one, Robbie Anderson. And this one seems like a huge bump up coming because nobody was really thinking about Robbie Anderson. And now he's been great. We've talked about the fact that he seems to have usurped DJ Moore in the Panthers pecking order. So I would think that Robbie Anderson now becomes like a solid middle round pick at this point.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what we've seen over the last couple of weeks that DJ Moore is starting to take on more prominence in this offense, but it's not like Robbie Anderson is going away. And I know that they really like the way that not only can he stretch the field, but they're throwing him underneath routes as well, which has been kind of not a surprise, but you kind of thought like, oh, he was just going to be the deep threat. He was going to be the field stretcher, but he's shown a much more robust route tree. So he's always going to be in the mix, and there's going to be some favorable matchups when they go up against the Atlanta Falcons. You're going to want to start him. And, plays like this where he does make a move. I don't know if he makes a move or a guy just falls, but whatever it is, definitely somebody who should have been drafted a lot higher. I think that I'm guilty as anybody of kind of dismissing him and not thinking that was going to have a huge impact at all. So, that's a guy that needs to move up. Of all the players that we're talking about right now, who would probably rocket up the draft boards.
Yeah, Anderson, I think, is a guy that all of a sudden, if we knew then what we know now, he's a guy that I think probably comes off the board in maybe the fifth, sixth round, something like that. It's been amazing because I was with you. I didn't think it was a fit. I thought it was a weird match, other than he had a relationship with Matt Rule from his college days, but I just didn't see that a guy who was a deep threat with the Jets would work out with Teddy Bridgewater, a guy who's not known for throwing the ball deep. But credit Joe Brady for figuring out how to use him, how to get him involved in that offense, and kind of making this thing work because it's been great. Maybe it also just helps that he, got loose from Adam Gase, which seems to be a big key, which means a big Le'Veon Bell game is coming because it is not only is it, it's not his first game with the Chiefs. I know he played last week, but
right.
It's his real first true opportunity after having a couple weeks of practice, and on top of it, it's a revenge game. Like, this is a huge Le'Veon Bell game incoming.
May I say something about that
Sure.
too? And I'm sorry if this is later on in the rundown, but you understand that I have to look at like 50 rundowns a week. So if I'm stepping on some toes, you do the same thing.
You're all clear. You're all clear.
You know exactly what we're talking about. I see people being like, I don't want any part of Le'Veon Bell this week because he carried the ball 6 times. I'm like, none of that matters. Like, he's now, like, everything you said is not only true. I'm going to take that a step further. I'm really curious to see what Andy Reid thinks about Adam Gase and particularly Greg Williams. Because if Andy Reid, one of the classiest guys in the NFL, if he's out there and Le'Veon Bell's in the Wildcat when they're up 40 in the fourth quarter, you're going to be able to tell, like, oh yeah, like, Andy Reid kind of has a problem with these guys. So I'm really curious if he's gonna pull it back, or if he's just gonna be like second half, be like, they're up by 30, and you're like, yeah, do whatever you want. Just run everything to Le'Veon Bell. Make sure he gets into the end zone. I think that that's coming. I really do. And so I would start him as a flex guy at the very bare minimum. So I don't know. I don't know how. I know everybody's roster is different, and somebody's gonna be like, yeah, but I had Kamara and Dalvin Cook, and okay, fine, smart guy. But for most normal mortals, I would love to see the lineup where you're not at least taking a chance on Le'Veon Bell in the flex spot.
I absolutely would start Lev Bell this week because I feel like this game has the potential to be one of those games where, and now that we're talking it up, it's not going to work out this way. But it's like where they just start letting the players call plays at some point, and they're just going to let Lev Bell say, "Hey, look, I want my shot. I want to go. I want to get a little get back on Adam Gase." I could see that happening. I would, if I had Lev Bell, I would absolutely have him in my lineup this week against the Jets. So that's that. All right, that was Fast Connections presented by Verizon. Last election, millions of voters were unable to cast their ballots. Why? No game plan. Join the NFL family by making your game plan today and making your voice heard this November. Visit NFL.com/votes to learn more. When we come back, it's a TNF preview. Falcons at Panthers on deck for Thursday Night Football, and we'll talk about it next on the NFL Fantasy Football Show. Time for a TNF preview. The Atlanta Falcons head to Carolina to take on the Panthers. I guess technically they head to Charlotte, which is in North Carolina, as opposed to South Carolina. We should just clarify that for the record. Anyway, the Falcons, in the midst of a pretty awful slide. We talked about Todd Gurley and his game-losing touchdown last week, but they get a fresh shot at it. The matchup for the wide receivers and the quarterback for Atlanta, not great on paper. The Panthers' pass defense has been pretty good this year. But that said, you're still starting Julio Jones and you're still starting Calvin Ridley. So for you, what do you expect from them, knowing that the matchup's not good, but you're putting them in your lineup anyway?
Yeah, it is a very difficult matchup, as you said, but I anticipate this game being a little bit more high scoring. I think that we've seen this season that the trend kind of goes towards the higher scoring performances. Now, obviously this game last week with the Detroit Lions kind of throws, that whole narrative into the wind. But I really do believe that with these two players, like you just don't bench them. That's just the one thing. Like last week I tried to get too cute with the whole Tyler Lockett thing and didn't like a matchup. And you're like, yeah, maybe you should fade this guy who's been struggling. And now you're like, yeah, whatever. Like if they're a good player, I'm going to start them. Matchup be damned. I think Julio obviously has earned that as perhaps the best wide receiver in the game right now. And Calvin Ridley is quickly moving up those ranks as well. So I have no hesitation with either one of them. I know if we're playing daily, it's going to be a little bit might be leaning towards the Carolina Panthers side. But, I think for season long, there's no hesitation in starting either one of these players.
Yeah, I think when I was looking at a daily lineup, I very much went Panther heavy when it came to the pass catchers. But here, I still think with Calvin Ridley, you've gotten 16 points or more in every single game. I mean, he's the wide receiver 3 right now and has been absolutely lights out. And so I think you're still looking at double digits for Calvin Ridley. And I think even with Julio Jones, you could probably still get, 10 to 12 points there. So it's one of those things. And I know you feel this way too, that I would much rather, I feel like if I take a guy who's playing well or a talented guy like Julio Jones or Calvin Ridley, and if I put them in and they have a bad game, then I look at them like, well, hey, it's one of those things that happens. If I leave them on the bench and they have a great game, then I just feel like the idiot. Like at least this way I can pass some blame. If I put them in my lineup and they play poorly,
right,
I can pass that blame along somewhere else as opposed to just, watching that number get big on my bench and blaming myself. So you're starting them. You might not like the matchup, but you're going to start those guys and you're going to hope for the best. So that brings us to the quarterbacks. Matt Ryan on the one side, Teddy Bridgewater on the other. Given the choice between the two of them, who would you rather start?
I'm going to go with Teddy Bridgewater. And I feel like we've had the formula down with Teddy pretty well. We've played him in the proper spots when he's had big blow-up games and big blow-up matchups. He's done really well. And when the number said, do not start this player, and I would go back to the Bears game a couple of weeks ago, we put him on the bench. He didn't score well, and it was fine. And then last week, he was kind of in the middle. Wasn't great, wasn't bad. He didn't kill you. He was a late stream. Like if you were caught off guard and you forgot to pick up because your quarterback was on a bye or whatever it was, he was fine. Like last week, what do you have? Close to 20 fantasy points. It's good. It's a good match. You can't be mad at that. Late night Taco Bell. It's not probably what you woke up in the morning desiring to have, or maybe you did because you're 19. But the point is, it's still pretty good, and you still enjoyed it, so you're fine. So move on. And of course, in this matchup, outside of Matt Stafford, who has a tendency to never play well in these crush spots, like Matt Stafford is your friend who never shows up for big events, like your wedding, birthday parties, or whatever. But like a random Wednesday, he's there. Like, oh, good to see you, Matt Stafford. And you know what? All of you know somebody in your life just like this. And that's Matt Stafford in a great matchup. But Teddy Bridgewater always comes through for you. So trust him and start him this week.
I'm 100% with you on starting Teddy B this week. Matt Ryan has been a bit of a roller coaster. The matchup is not good. And he's not like Julio or Calvin Ridley where you feel like you have to have him in your lineup. There are options. Teddy, I think, is a much better option this week. And speaking of Matt Stafford, now that his pal Clayton Kershaw has gotten over the hump, maybe Matt Stafford can do it too. Maybe we can see Matt Stafford take advantage of one of these crush opportunities and go. Now that his buddy has gotten the monkey off his back, maybe Matt Stafford.
Wait, are they did they go to high school together or something?
They grew up together. I know that that's not well known. No one talks about this. In fact, I feel like I'm maybe the first person to report this, that they are friends. They know each other.
That's crazy. And by the way, is the monkey off the back of Clayton Kershaw? Like, because I'm just trying to think. I have never thought in my life a guy who's allegedly the greatest pitcher of his generation to where you're like, don't let him pitch past the fifth inning of an important game. Like that's still a thing. And I know it was fine this year. And people were like, hey, why are they pulling Kershaw out of the game? It's like, look, just because the toddler hasn't lit the house on fire, you still remove the lighter from his hand. Like that's just my thing. But whatever. Congratulations to Kershaw. He seems like a nice guy. Only Max Muncy is a guy who's not a nice guy.
Only Max.
He's the one. Yeah, I want to go back. I'll go back. Cody Bellinger just seems like the guy who sat at the back of your math class and was like, I'm never going to need to know this. But certainly he knows how to do a launch angle because he's got the launch angliest swing of all time. So apparently you did need to know that. But in any event, I don't know. Go Matt. I don't even know what I was talking about now. I'm sorry. Bartlett hates me.
I'm just amazed that you have such animosity toward Max Muncy. I felt like he was sort of an unassuming guy, but who knew?
He should be. You're the guy in Cobra Kai that I shouldn't even care about. Like I get it. Like if you didn't like Johnny Lawrence, okay, but the other guys, like who cares? You're anonymous. Like just go along. You're not here to steal the show, which you always seem to be trying to do.
Oh, that's hilarious. All right, we're going to take a break so that Adam Rank can regroup a little bit because he's got his starts and sits coming up in the next segment. Check out more of the NFL Fantasy Football Show presented by DraftKings. It's time for Secure Starts presented by Visa. For peace of mind online, Visa's got you covered. Time for the Week 8 starts and sits, courtesy of Adam Ranks. Let's just start with the quarterbacks. Who is on your mind that should be in everybody's lineups this week?
Well, we just talked about him a moment ago. Tom Brady, again, the multi-layered revenge game going up against the team that unseated him for the Super Bowl title twice, including a perfect season in 2007. Now he goes up against this squad that has allowed the eighth most passing yards to quarterbacks this season. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with the fact that the Giants are always losing, so teams don't throw the ball as much. But one of the things I really love about Bruce Arians is that he loves to throw the football, and as a beneficiary of that is Tom Brady, who's had at least 32 fantasy points in 2 out of his last 4 games. And another quarterback that I will look at this week is somebody who's been a little maligned, and that's Carson Wentz. But he's had at least 2 passing touchdowns in 3 straight games. He has 5 rushing touchdowns this season that I don't think is getting enough. That's not getting enough love. Like people are talking about Josh Love and Kyler Murray and these other quarterbacks who are running, but Carson Wentz is out there crushing. He's had at least 21 fantasy points in 4 of his last 5 games. And the Dallas Cowboys, that's now a team that you stream your players against. If you have a really good player you want to go against, you go against the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, the Cowboys that's been easy fodder for us pretty much all year long, which, as long as that continues, then that's fine. We always just want to find the weak spots and kind of pick on those. All right, running back Kareem Hunt still just balling away for the Cleveland Browns right now.
Yeah, he's still on his solo tour, right now. And at some point he's going to have to go back and rejoin his band. I don't know what the best analogy would be. Maybe it's like when Tom DeLonge was doing Angels and Airwaves, and he would dismiss himself from Blink. Well, now he's permanently dismissed from Blink 182, but you know what I mean. I just want to enjoy this last ride from Kareem Hunt because it's been pretty fantastic. He's had at least 18 fantasy points in 3 out of his last 4 games, and now he's got the Las Vegas Raiders, who've allowed the second most fantasy points per game to the position this season. They've allowed 9 touchdowns to running backs this year. That's the second highest total in the NFL. So we love Kareem Hunt in this spot. And let's go to that Jets game. I know we talked about Le'Veon Bell, but I do want to pitch putting in Clyde Edwards-Helaire into your lineup again. Of course, the matchup is amazing. The Jets have allowed the 7th most fantasy points per game to running backs. And for everything that Clyde Edwards-Helaire has been this year, and I think a lot of us, me specifically, really wanted him to be this overwhelming Alvin Kamara type number 1 running back. We got to look back and realize that we've got a rookie who's had at least 11 fantasy points in every game this season. That's pretty significant. I know we probably overdrafted him, but that's fine. Like at some point, do you care if you overdrafted him or not? Like, yeah, maybe I paid an extra $100 for the driver, but I got one that I really like and I'm crushing it straight and true off the tee. So who cares?
I honestly think that most people outside of like the true diehards and the people who like, maybe do this for a living probably don't remember where they drafted most players, but you remember how they finished. You remember the kind of numbers they put up, but you generally don't remember, whether you got a guy in the 3rd round or the 5th round or something like that. You just don't. You just kind of care about what they do on a week-to-week basis. And Clyde Edwards-Helaire has been pretty good on a week-to-week basis. Wide receiver, who's on your mind this week?
Well, I really love A.J. Brown, and it was weird because in a lot of drafts that I was in this year, and you talk about this, Marcus, where it wasn't industry insiders, A.J. Brown tumbled a little bit, and I never quite understood why. I remember messaging one of my friends during the draft being like, why does nobody want A.J. Brown? And people are just kind of like shrugging their shoulders and moving on. But I really love, I he's clearly the number 1 option for the Tennessee Titans. And again, I don't know how much they're going to have to throw the ball in this contest. I hope it does kind of evolve into a high-scoring game because the Titans have allowed the most fantasy points to wide receivers over the last 3 weeks, and they're playing a team that loves to throw the football. So I hope this lends itself to being a high-scoring game. So I love A.J. Brown. And I did want to throw a little bit of a shout-out, too, to Stephon Diggs, who has been one of the most consistent wide receivers in the NFL this season. Again, we talked about this earlier in the show about Josh Allen and what a difference having a player like Stephon Diggs in your lineup, what he means to them, because he is such a consistent option each and every week. And we love Smokey Brown, but Stephon Diggs is just at another level. And I'm almost a little disappointed that Justin Jefferson's playing so well, because I would love to make fun of the Vikings for this move, but they actually got a good receiver in return, using one of those draft picks on Justin Jefferson. But this is one of those deals that works out for everybody. Love the matchup this week against the New England Patriots. I think what we've seen from the Patriots is that the depth is starting to get exposed. They were one of the teams that had the most, if not the most, opt-outs heading into this season. And where it ends up showing itself is this time of the year, not having that depth. So a team that at one point you would never want to start wide receivers against, now you feel pretty comfortable going with guys like Stephon Diggs.
Yeah, I think that's an important part too, is that we kind of have glossed over all the opt-outs they had and how much that decimated their defense. It's not just Tom Brady leaving that has made the Patriots different. They have a lot of personnel that are gone, and I think it's really impacted them. Tight ends, who should be starting this week at tight end?
Well, I'm going to go with Darren the Baller Waller. I know when you look at the FPA, the fantasy points against for the Cleveland Browns, they've been very generous to opposing wide receivers, which is going to lead a lot of people to go with Nelson Aguilar and Henry Ruggs III, excuse me. But I think you got to put Waller into this mix as well. I think that this is going to be another exploitable matchup. I think they're going to have to throw the ball a little bit more. I think this is just a good matchup for all your Raiders. I know last week it was a little bit of a disappointment because they were going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and you were bummed out and you're like, oh, this could have been so much better. Or, if the Bucs actually had a bad defense. The Bucs defense is good now. The Browns no longer do. And another tight end that I like, I'm going to go back to Jonnu Smith because he's the tight end 4 right now. Struggled the last couple of weeks, and it hasn't quite been as good as it could have been. But this is a fantastic matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals, who have allowed a top 3 fantasy tight end in 3 consecutive games. But last week, Harrison Bryant, who we talked about, had 2 touchdowns. David Njoku had a touchdown, 3 touchdowns to tight ends. So I think that this is going to be a huge bounce back game for Jonnu Smith, and I can't wait to get him back into my lineup.
And hopefully for Jonnu, that ankle, I think it was an ankle injury he was nursing. Hopefully that gets a little bit better too, because the matchup is fantastic. And I said before the season, one of my hot takes is that he was going to win people some fantasy leagues. And so far, he seems to be on track to doing that. So, yeah, good for me. Defenses, what 2 defenses are you looking at starting this week?
Well, the easiest one to do is going to be picking up the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and starting anybody against the New York Giants. Danny Dimes has been turning the ball over with great proficiency. That was something that I kind of hoped would just go away. You're like, hopefully, we'll be turning the corner on this turnover issue, but apparently it's still there and it's not going away. And it is really something that the Giants are going to have to address, because Danny Dimes is a great talent, but we're just not going to get the full operational Danny Jones unless he stops turning the ball over. But you pick up defenses and stream them. I also like the Philadelphia Eagles this week. And it goes back to the Dallas Cowboys being a team that not only do you start your offensive stars against, but you also want to stream a defense against them. The Washington FT was a great stream last week. This week, it's going to be the Eagles. Now, before, the problem with the Cowboys, I know that there's questions about the quarterback position, who's going to be starting. The key thing for me is the offensive line. They were stung by early retirements, some injuries, and it seemed every year when we would go into the season, you could count on the Cowboys offensive line. Like when Kevin Smith made a movie, you're like, oh, I'm automatically going to laugh. And then he did Cop Out. And that's probably more Bruce Willis's fault than anybody else. But you know what? It did break a string of enjoyable flicks. So with the Cowboys, now you want to stream your defenses against them. And the Eagles are up this week. And you know what? When you're trying to figure this out, sometimes it might be too late to hear my voice about the Eagles defense right now. Start looking ahead. See who the Giants play the following week. See who the Jets are playing in the following weeks, the Cowboys and all those, and start thinking 2 moves ahead. Start playing chess instead of playing checkers.
What we've seen, I think, from the Cowboys is that Dak Prescott was a really great deodorant and sort of covered up how bad this team kind of stinks. Now they don't have that anymore, and it is on full display. So, yeah.
Do you wear deodorant still?
You know what? No. Not today.
Yeah, me neither. I don't know. I'm like, why bother? I mean, I'm already pot committed. I've been wearing deodorant for years, but if you're a young person, stop it. You don't see anybody anymore. You're inside. You're fine.
You'll be fine. It'll be all right. All right. There goes any deodorant sponsorships we were ever going to get on this show. So, but we do have one. That was Secure Starts, presented by Visa. Please stay with us, Visa. Anyway, now we've gone from the top starts this week to the top sits. Which quarterbacks are you leaving on your bench?
Ben Roethlisberger has been playing very well. Obviously, his team is undefeated, but that hasn't translated to fantasy points. It's a little disappointing. You're like, hey, we remember the Steelers from 2018 when they were attempting 600 passes a season, but now the volume is just not there. He's had fewer than 13 fantasy points in back-to-back games, and the Ravens are a tough defense. They've allowed 8 touchdown passes to quarterbacks this season. That's 4th fewest in the NFL. Understand, 4 of those came in one game against Patrick Mahomes. So outside of Patrick Mahomes, no quarterback has had success against this team, so we're leaving them on the bench. Another quarterback that we're not going to be starting this week either is going to be Phillip Rivers. This probably goes without saying. I probably didn't need to. You're like, thanks, Rank. I wasn't planning on starting him anyways. But you know what? I'm just telling you right now, you're not going to start him. That's the way it's going to go. And that's my thing. I think that this is a perfect opportunity for Jonathan Taylor to get into the mix. And really, outside the game against the Bengals got so out of hand the last time that we saw them that it really kind of clipped what would have been a great Jonathan Taylor game, because his snap percentage is going up. It's trending up. Well, in week 2, he had 60% of the snaps, but it was starting to trend back up and probably would have hit that number again if they had not fallen behind the Bengals. I expect that number to get close to 60%. So they're going to run the football, start Jonathan Taylor, don't start the quarterback.
Yeah, Philip Rivers has been such a mess that it's just hard to imagine they're going to continue to put the ball in his hands when if they don't have to. So that probably is good news for Jonathan Taylor. Speaking of running backs, so which running backs are you avoiding this week?
Well, I have Leonard Fournette on this, and part of it is because I have to turn in this cheat sheet so early that I didn't really I don't know. It's tough. I know that he outsnapped Ronald Jones last week, and it's kind of tough to go in between the two of them. I know that this is a good matchup going up against the Giants. They allow a lot of points. They should be scoring a lot of points. So I'm just trying to avoid somebody who's in a timeshare at this point, if it's possible. And so I have Leonard Fournette there. I think that Ron Jones kind of gets back into the mix. I thought it was kind of strange that they went away from him because Ronald Jones had 100 rushing yards in 3 out of the last 4 games. He had 3 rushing touchdowns in his last 2 games combined. So I don't know why you went out for that. So I expect that to go back and be more of a 50-50 split. And another guy I'm talking about is going to be Adrian Peterson. Now, this one I feel confident in because DeAndre Swift is now taking over that role as the running back for the Detroit Lions. It was fine. Like, it was cool. Like, Adrian Peterson with the Lions was like when Timothy Oliphant was on The Office. Like, it was a cool cameo. It was fun to see him. You're like, oh, that's fun. I didn't expect to see that. Here he is. Oh, Adrian Peterson, you were fine for a couple of games. But now this is an opportunity for DeAndre Swift, who had some injuries early on, didn't have a training camp. But now that he's fully vested in this offense, I think that he's the guy that you're going to want to start. So Adrian Peterson is on the bench, and he's almost to the point where you could probably release him at some point. I'd hang on to him. Don't have Kerryon Johnson for sure, but Adrian Peterson, his relevance is starting to wane.
It took a while for us to get to the DeAndre Swift portion of the proceedings, but we're here now, and so better late than never. And that definitely means that I think Kerryon Johnson is certainly expendable on fantasy rosters. Wide receiver, speaking of expendable, I mean, Michael Gallup, it's been bad, and it's only gotten worse, I think, since Andy Dalton's taken over.
Yeah, you know what? And I had high hopes for Michael Gallup. I mean, coming into the season, even with CeeDee Lamb, we were looking at an offense that still needed to replace 177 targets. So we thought, well, there's enough to go around, but it's never really worked out for Michael Gallup. Now, the first time that Andy Dalton came into a game and started targeting him in some big spots, you're like, okay, this could work out for Michael Gallup. But we've seen over the last couple of weeks, he just doesn't seem to have a prominent role in this offense. Did not have a point against the Washington FT. He's also a player that you could think about dropping. And Devontae Parker is a player I'm really worried about this week for the Miami Dolphins. The Rams have allowed the second fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers this season. So that's pretty tough. We saw last week how they were able to handle Allen Robinson. That pass rush is going to be going up against a rookie quarterback. So there's a lot of things in play here that makes me apprehensive about Devontae Parker. Now, as always, check the rankings. I don't want you to start some crazy flyer on a player and be like, you told me to sit Devontae Parker. Realize this is a guide. Like, the only for sure guy I would bench is Preston Williams, because he's top 10 fantasy points once in his last 6 games for sure. Devontae Parker, I'm really worried about. He's listed as a sit. Check the rank. It's very simple. Like, somebody's like, you should make this easier. I'm like, the rankings could not be more easy. Always check the rankings. I'm just letting you know this is not a great matchup, and be very careful with it.
So basically you're telling me that I shouldn't, sit Devontae Parker in favor of, I don't know, Dante Pettis or something like that. That what you're telling me?
I would probably start Devontae Parker in that one.
Okay.
That's just
right.
And if Dante Pettis has a monster game, we're all going to be like, damn. Obviously that's not going to happen, but you know what I'm saying.
Right, exactly. Tight end. Who should we be avoiding this week?
Eric Ebron got some action last week, but we're not really digging this matchup going against the Baltimore Ravens this week. I think that this one is going to be this is going to be one of those old school games between the Ravens and the Steelers. I know for a number of years, they started getting a little bit more high scoring and put up a lot more offense than we were used to. But I think with the Steelers being as proficient as they have been defensively, and obviously we talked about the Ravens a moment ago when talking about Ben Roethlisberger, there's not a lot of passing options that I really trust this week for the Steelers, and Eric Ebron is included. And I know a lot of people are asking about Trey Burton with the Colts, somebody that we thought could have a bigger role this season. And I kind of like him. I think season long, he's somebody to keep an eye on. He's definitely a matchup-based guy for me. But again, going back to what we were talking about with Phillip Rivers, I expect this to be a more run-heavy game. Trey Burton, I mean, if they start dialing up plays again for him where he's running the Wildcat or anything like that, then I will be ultimately chagrined. But right now, I'm going to have to avoid this one, and so I'm going to leave him on the bench. If you need to stream a tight end, I would say that you have to go look at some other options. I know Robert Tonyan is an interesting one because he kind of disappeared last week with Devontae Adams' return to the Green Bay Packers, but I think somebody like that might be a little bit better off than Trey Burton this week.
Phillip Rivers loves his tight ends. The problem is Phillip Rivers is having problems getting the football out. So that makes it a little bit dicey with a guy like Trey Burton right now. And finally, 2 defenses that people should stay away from this week.
Well, the Seahawks, I this should probably go without saying, but I still believe that, as you like to say, there's some muscle memory for a lot of these defenses. You're just like, oh yeah, the Seahawks. Like you're looking through and you're like, oh my gosh, like why are the Seahawks still here? No, they're not good anymore. They're still the Legion of Boom, but Lex Luthor has been replaced by his cousin Ned, and Ned Luthor, not quite the devious malefactor that Lex is. And it's kind of allowed a lot of teams to put up a lot of points. Like I'm going to be talking on NFL Fantasy Live about how Jimmy Garoppolo has the best matchup of any quarterback this week. That doesn't mean I'm starting him. I'm just saying he has the best matchup on paper. So avoid the Seahawks. Also avoid the Miami Dolphins this week too. I know a lot of people will go into these narratives and they'll be like, oh my gosh, West Coast team coming to the East Coast. They're playing in that early window. But you have to understand that this season, Sean McVay's teams have thrived on the East Coast. They've averaged over 30 points per game in all of their East Coast games this season. And I think over the course of his career, they're very good on the East Coast. Sean McVay is an excellent football coach. If that wasn't evident to you on Monday night, it never will be. The only time he's really been shown up was in the Super Bowl against Bill Belichick. I don't think that's ever going to happen again. So I love Sean McVay. I don't want to play a defense against the Rams. And by the way, if I can take a moment. So please. On Monday night, what, can I say something? Is there a producer in my ear telling me not to tell this story? It's a clean story. Like, don't worry about it. So Monday night, League of Record, I've got a 12-point lead in a half-point PPR going against Cooper Kupp and the Bears DST. And so obviously the Bears shut down Cooper Kupp. That was going fine. And so the Bears defense was doing nothing. They had 1 point in the league, our league scoring. And I'm sitting there. My team is getting crushed. This night sucks. I'm upset. And I'm like, well, at least like the smallest consolation. I would rather win the game and lose my fantasy match as a Bears fan. I'm like, oh, okay. And then Eddie Jackson scores a touchdown. And I'm like, you guys did just enough to take. So now I have to sit here and be humiliated in front of everybody. And thankfully, all my friends who are Rams fans are texting me. And then the insult to injury is that the Bears defense does just enough to ruin me. So I'm like, this is a perfect night. And then the Dodgers won the next night. And actually, I don't care about the Dodgers. Then Max Muncy won a World Series the next night. And then I was super mad. But I was happy for Justin and Joe. So it's,
So there's some silver linings there for you.
There's definite silver linings. Like, it's good for Corona High. I think it's good for us to have a World Series champion once again, because Joe obviously played for the Boston Red Sox. That was weird rooting for the Red Sox too, because you're like, because I want Joe Kelly to win. Like my life has come down to rooting for players, not teams.
One day the Angels.
Someday. Trevor Bauer, if you're watching this, come play for the Angels.
Yeah.
Bring Braun Strowman with you, or not Braun. You know who I'm talking about. Marcus Strowman.
Marcus Strowman? That guy. Yeah, that guy.
Bring the WWE superstar Braun Strowman.
I mean, he can come hype up the crowd before.
How am I not fired from the show, by the way?
I have no idea.
Bartlett, the producer, has to hate me. Like, he cannot he cannot be a fan of mine.
You can check out the rest of Adam Rank Starts and Sit at NFL.com/startsit. We'll take a break, and Rank may or may not come back for the final segment. Either way, we're going to talk about some wiretaps on the NFL Fantasy Football Show. So if you haven't checked out Fantasy Bites, you should absolutely do that. It is our new show. It's new this season, I guess. We're 7-8 weeks into it, but it's new this season with Adam Rank, Kimmy Checks, Michael F. Florio. They talk about anything and everything to help you get ready for the upcoming week in fantasy football. You can see it Thursday, 6 p.m. Eastern, NFL.com, the NFL Fantasy app, and on YouTube, so be sure to check it out. What is on the docket for this week's show, Rank?
Well, we're really going to dive into Justin Herbert this week and take a look at his fantastic season. Take a look at Tyler Lockett's huge game against the Arizona Cardinals last week and see if that's going to be sustainable. And we will also have Rank's Rant of the Week, and it will not be about Max Muncy, although it might be.
It might be. Not. Who knows? Tune in to find out. All right, so as we wrap up the show, as always, we do usually the wire tap. So the guys that you might have grabbed off the waiver wire that, are you or are you not playing them this week? So the first one is Rashard Higgins, who likely slides in to take the place of Odell Beckham Jr., who's out for the rest of the year with a torn ACL. They've got the Raiders, who've been middle of the pack when it comes to fantasy wide receivers. So if you have Hollywood Higgins, do you start him this week?
Well, it was a good pickup, and we saw what he could do when given the opportunity. Had a great stat line last week. The problem that we had with Odell Beckham Jr., though, was not his talent or his ability or anything like that. It was the opportunity. This is a run-first team. He is going up against the Raiders, who've allowed the second most fantasy points to running backs. This is going to be a heavy Kareem Hunt game script. So the reasons that you would sit somebody like Odell Beckham Jr. should now transfer to Hollywood Higgins just because he's new to your team and you're excited about that. The philosophy still remains the same. So I think he's a good player. He's a good, and I always felt like I always had to come out and say that about Odell because I never wanted to seem like I was dumping on the player. And I think Higgins is very good, but I think this is a run heavy game for me. So unless I actually see your roster and you could be like, oh, I'd start him over this guy or that guy, I gotta say, like, my recommendation of that, this is going to be a heavy run game script.
I think there are better opportunities down the road. So you got the Raiders this week, and it's, like you said, it's potentially a run-heavy game for the Browns. Then they have a bye. But after that, they've got the Texans, the Eagles, the Jaguars, the Titans, all of whom are pretty flexible when it comes to fantasy wide receivers. So there might be some other opportunities after the bye. This is a week that unless you absolutely need him, you could probably hold off and maybe find some better options. On the other side of that game, though, there's Nelson Aguilar, who has scored touchdowns in 3 straight weeks and is kind of becoming a thing for the Raiders. And the Browns secondary definitely has some holes in it. So if you picked up Swagalore, would you consider him?
Well, that's the thing, Marcus. I know we're going to talk about him, or we talked about him on NFL Fantasy Live. The Browns have allowed the second most fantasy points to wide receivers this season, or the second most receiving yards. It's pretty bad. They're very generous to opposing wide receivers. And looking through the waiver wire today, I missed out on, actually, I didn't even put in a claim for Rashard Higgins because I knew nobody was going to pick up Nelson Aguilar, and I didn't want to burn a waiver position for picking up Aguilar. My only reason for possibly not playing him this week is that I also have Josh Jacobs on my League of Record team that I'm thinking of specifically. So I might lean towards Scotty Miller in that one. But anybody else who needs a wide receiver, you absolutely should have picked up Nelson Aguilar. And I think he's available in 85% of leagues still. That is the player I would rather start in this game over Higgins for sure.
Aguilar, to me, has kind of quietly become the number one wide receiver in Las Vegas. I mean, Darren Waller's still the number one target, but Henry Ruggs, he had the one big game, but even then, he had 118 yards on, I think, 2 catches. So, he's not seeing a ton of targets. He's not seeing a ton of opportunity. Aguilar is getting more looks. I think he's more of a downfield threat than Hunter Renfrow. So he at least should be on rosters. He's a matchup-based guy, but this is one of the matchups where this is the matchup. This is one of the matchups where you would start him. So, I think if you're hurting, I mean, there are some wide receivers that are going to be out this week. I mean, the Cardinals are on a bye, so that means you don't have Nuke, you don't have Christian Kirk potentially. So this is a week I think you can get Swagalore into your lineup. So. Last one, JaMycal Hasty, and who knows what's going on with the Niners backfield. There's so many options there. And the Seahawks run defense is actually not too bad, but Hasty should get some touches. Is it worth maybe putting him in the lineup?
Yeah, I'd probably avoid this because there could also be the looming specter of Jerick McKinnon being in there as well, because last week he seemed like a healthy scratch because they wanted to rest him. They was on a pitch count, or I don't know. I don't know if Kyle Shanahan's also managing the Rays as well, and he's got to put these guys on. What was happening with that guy? But in any event, yeah, the Seahawks have been good against running backs, and their FPA probably shifted a little bit because Chase Edmonds ended up having a pretty nice game against them on Sunday night. But pretty much throughout the course of the season, teams have been able to throw on the Seahawks, haven't had as much success as running the football. Obviously, the 49ers are a different team, and Kyle Shanahan's going to do whatever he wants to do. I still don't have enough trust. I think Jermichael Hasty, and I know I've seen this comparison thrown out there about how he's a mini Marshawn Lynch, and it's like, whoa, let's pump the brakes a little bit. But I do like him as a player, and I just wish at some point Kyle Shanahan would throw us a bone, or else we could just play RB 49ers or whatever it is, because I would love to start this guy if he was getting the opportunity, even in a matchup that's deemed a little bit tougher. But unless I know he's going to be the number one guy, I can't really advise it.
It's been fun to watch him run, but you're right. I think McKinnon sees more work this week. Again, it would have been nice if Shanahan told us ahead of time, hey, we might just rest him, might just, some Kawhi Leonard style load management for Jerick McKinnon. That would have been good to know ahead of time. We know Jeff Wilson's gone. We know Raheem Mostert's gone. The other part of this equation is that Tevin Coleman might come back, which he always weirdly gets carries, even though he seems to be the least effective running back on the 49ers roster. I can't figure that one out. So I do think Hasty should be on rosters, but I'm with you. I don't know that this is a week that I would give him a start. By the way, you were talking about Ned Luthor earlier, and it just made me think of Ned Beatty in Superman. But he was Otis, right? He wasn't Ned in that movie. So, all right. That's all.
That would have been cool if he was Ned
Luthor. Point to that
story. Dude, none of the kids watching the show has seen that version of Superman, so you could have just blown that under the radar.
Probably. There was really no point to that story other than I just wanted to throw it in and get it out there. So that feels like a pretty good way to pull the chute on this episode. That is it. We are done. We appreciate you hanging out with the NFL Fantasy Football Show presented by DraftKings. You know the drill. Tell two friends to tell two friends. Rate, review, and remember, whatever happened to all those people who stopped and asked you for directions? Take care of yourselves. Be safe. Wear a mask, and we will see you on Friday.